Hello and welcome to this small tutorial on importing assets, specifically textures, into Unity. Importing assets is usually quite straightforward in Unity and involves simply dragging and dropping the files that you want to use into the project window. But there's a few things that really pay off if you know about them. That's what I'm going to show you in this video. First of all, if you are looking for assets, I can very much recommend opengameart.org. It's a great website where a lot of artists share their creations, and a lot of it is also under the public domain license, like this bluebird that we're going to use in this tutorial. When you look for art, you want to make sure that the file has a transparent background, or at least a black background that we can make transparent in Unity. But Unity does not have any image editing software, so you can't make a white or otherwise colored background transparent. You will have to image edit the file before and make sure that it's ready for Unity with a transparent or black background. Getting your files into Unity is super easy. You simply take them from your Finder or Explorer and select them and drag them into the project window. And there we go, now they are imported. Since Unity has the assets folder as part of the project folder, if we go and look at the folder now in the Explorer, here in assets, you can also see that there is a copy of the image files inside the project folder. So the files are not linked, they are actually copied inside the project themselves. If we look at the imported files now, we can see that there's a little arrow here beside it. And this means that this image here is imported as a sprite, and the actual sprite is what we can see on the right. Now, Unity has different methods or ways to handle image files. So one of them would be a sprite for 2D use, and because we are in 2D mode, the default would be a sprite. And otherwise, there could be, for example, textures for 3D models, various kinds of shader effects, and so on. So if we click on it, we can see in the texture type, in the inspector, in the file's import settings, that we are on sprite indeed. Other texture types would, for example, be default. That is for any kind of 3D materials and texturing of 3D models. Normal maps and light maps, and that is for lighting in 3D. And there's, for example, also a cursor for different kinds of mouse cursor files, but we want a sprite, so we just leave it there. So let's go ahead now and take our bird and put that into the game. For that, what we could do is we can create a new empty game object. Just call that bird, and then we add a sprite renderer component here. And into the sprite field of it, we would just drag the sprite object. A bit easier is also to just take the sprite and drag it into the hierarchy or the scene view, and it will make an object that is called like the sprite is called and has the sprite renderer already attached with the correct sprite edit. Okay, now let's get rid of this again. And if we look at this bird now, it's quite huge. And if I go and actually look at the game in maximized view, it takes up the entire screen. So let's see how we can fix that. The initial intuitive action would be to just scale it down, right? So we have a smaller bird that makes a bit more sense in the scale, but this is actually not a good idea to do. I have a small script here that animates an object, so let's put this on the bird. And all it does is just kind of bounces back and forth the min and max scale here. So if I press play now, you can see how the bird jumps back to its original size, and then the scale attributes, they bounce back and forth between min and max scale of this script. So the script does not respect the initial scale of the object. You could adapt it, of course, and kind of have it keep track of the initial scale as well. But if we use the built-in animation system. So I also have a small animation here, an animation clip that does the same thing. You can see how the same problem happens. So any kind of animation or any kind of modification to the scale of an object is always a problem if the object's original scale is not 1, 1, 1. So for any object that has animations attached to it or any kind of movement or anything that would affect its scale, you want to make sure that the original scale is 1, 1, 1. But that means we have to reduce the size of the bird another way. You could simply scale down the image file, but that would be a bit tedious if you have to modify each image file and then kind of test out what the correct dimensions for it is. So there is a better way in Unity for us to do that. And for that, we have to look at the import settings of our bird file again. So here we have this field called pixels per unit that is currently set to 100, and that tells Unity how many pixels of the pictures are covering one unit inside Unity. One unit, that would be the width and height of one of the squares inside of your scene view. So if we look at this, the bird is roughly 6 and a bit of these squares high, and it has a height in the texture of 633 pixels with 100 pixels per unit. That is exactly the height that we can see right now inside the scene view. So what you want to do is mess with this pixel per unit value here to find the right kind of size of the sprite inside your game. So let's set this to something like 400 and apply. And now the bird is a lot smaller because now more pixels of the texture are covering less space inside your game. And if we look at the transform component now, you can see that the scale remains at 111. So if I now play and let the animation play, you can see that it behaves properly. But that only applies to any kind of animated or moved object. For example, if we take our tree here and want to scale this up a bit, that's completely fine because it will never move. It's just a static object, like a prop in our game. So I can make lots of trees of different sizes here, and that won't be a problem since they won't be animated anyways. So I can be sure that there's no problem with the scaling. Next thing I would like to show you is what happens if you don't have a transparent background. I have this one spaceship here that has a black background. If I move it here inside the black area of the scene, of course you don't notice it, but you can see in the game view that it has this black square around it. You can change the way that alpha is handled, so transparency, in the advanced texture import settings, and you can set the alpha source to be from grayscale. However, that will of course make the black parts transparent, but it will also make anything else transparent that is darker colored. So now our spaceship here is partly translucent, and that's not ideal. So it's always a good idea to have all of your textures and image files that you want to use inside Unity with a transparent background. Now, so far this is all quite straightforward and easy, but it gets a bit more complicated if we come to sprite sheets, which is an image file that has multiple sprites inside of it. I have one of these sprite sheets here, and it is also pixel art, which means that the image is extremely small and only has 64 by 64 pixels in size here. But the artwork is pixelated, so we want to have each pixel be quite big on the screen. So let's get rid of the things that we have right now in the scene and drop our sprite sheet in here, and you can see it's teeny tiny. So the first thing we want to do is adjust the pixels per unit, and this time we have to scale it down in order to make the images bigger. Maybe a little bit more, 25. Oh, other way, not of course, 15. Yes, this looks alright. But if I zoom in a bit here, you can also see that it's sort of blurry, and that is because we don't use the right kind of texture filter mode. The problem with the blurriness originates in the fact that we very rarely have the case where each pixel from a texture is perfectly mapping to a pixel on your screen. So your pixel has, or your screen has a pixel resolution of something like 1920 by 1080, and the textures that we want to display, of course, have a different resolution, and their pixels don't map perfectly to the screen pixels. So Unity will try to interpolate between the image pixels that it picks up from the position of it and scale of it on the screen and the pixels that are actually on the screen and try to map them to each other. This here we call bilinear interpolation, and we don't want that happening for pixelated images, right? We want each pixel to be clearly visible. So instead of Unity trying to pick up the neighboring pixels from an image and then interpolating for them to avoid edges being visible and making a smooth image, which is great for images of high resolution. We want to have each pixel of the original image clearly be visible, and for that we set the filter mode from bilinear to point. Apply that, and now we have wonderful sharp pixel art. That still leaves us with the problem that we only have one big sprite here with all of our individual sprites still in it. And here now we have to use the sprite cutter tool that Unity offers. So we set the sprite mode of the image file to multiple, and then we can actually go to the sprite editor and cut out every single sprite ourselves. The problem of this file here is that we don't have a nice grid, so we can't use the slice tool and use a grid size or count slicer to automatically cut out every single grid item. But we can use the automatic one and hit slice. And now it will try to find shapes in the image and cut a sprite that kind of contains these shapes. Or you can also just click and drag and cut out an area as a new sprite yourself. This is a tedious work, especially if you have a sprite sheet with hundreds of different sprites in it. And here you can also see that the sprite automatic cutter isn't perfect, like it cut out this little blue explosion here, the 2 into 1. So I have to repair that and make another one over here. And also it doesn't automatically name the different sprites in a smart way. It just calls it sprite 2, sprite 1, sprite 0, and so forth. So we would have to give them individual names by hand ourselves. So let's do that for the little spaceship here. It's going to make sure that the sprite that is automatically generated has the right kind of dimensions, sort of like this. And then I call this spaceship. And I can close the sprite editor again, apply, and now you can see that it generates all of the sprites here in the project window, and I can drag them in to make an object that is only from that one sprite of the sprite sheet. The reason to pack all of these individual images into one sprite sheet in the first place is mostly a performance reason. When you want to render any kind of image, it has to be uploaded to the graphics card. And uploading one big image is simply faster than uploading a lot of small images. And the same goes for files on your hard disk. So opening one big file is always faster than opening 100 small ones. And that is why we use sprite sheets, especially for pixel art, because we have a lot of very tiny individual images. So to sum up, we learned the difference between an image file and a sprite inside Unity. We learned how to use the pixels per unit here to adjust the size, and that anything that's animated should always be at the default size or scale 1, 1, and 1. So make sure that you don't scale objects around that you want to animate or move. But it's okay if you have static objects like the tree. And then we learned that you want to have the filter mode set to point if you use pixel art to get sharp pixel layouts, and that you have to cut out the individual sprites from a sprite sheet if you have one of those.